That investigation is now complete. The central findings of the investigation are that the man whose voice is heard on the recording and on a second recording from the same conversation that was released on Sunday, accordingly, effective immediately.
And suddenly, we saw something that had never been seen before. However, this isn't about a made-up scandal. The WNBA didn't want Sophie Cunningham to pass a certain boundary, and this is what actually happened when she overspoke, when she overexposed herself. Additionally, the league made the decision that they would rather to find their own players than confront the reality of Caitlin Clark's situation. For weeks, I, Jackson Riley, have been following this story's digital breadcrumbs. Sophie disclosed more than just criticism in her podcast. It served as a blueprint for institutionalized referee bias, which is more pervasive than most people would want acknowledged. In response, the WNBA made an effort to keep her quiet. However, this is what they overlooked. You simply verify everything they say once you've found someone who is telling the truth. Hit the subscribe button before we go down this rabbit hole if you want to know the true story behind the headlines and the meta-narratives that don't want you to connect, because Sophie Cunningham's fine isn't the only thing I'm going to show you. IT concerns a league that would rather punish those who expose corruption than address it. First, let's examine Sophie Cunningham's true identity within this environment. She is more than just another WNBA star who is active on social media. Caitlin Clark's enforcer and guardian, Sophie Cunningham, intervenes when referees allow rival players to engage in excessive physical altercations with the league's top star. And because of that role, she has become hazardous to some powerful individuals. You see, Sophie isn't limited to basketball. She produces material. Her presence on TikTok is enormous. She isn't hesitant to voice her opinions, and her podcast has hundreds of thousands of listeners. She is the most dangerous type of insider due to her platform and closeness to Clark. She has both credibility and reach. The tale gets extremely interesting at this point, though. For months, Sophie has been keeping track of the Clark targeting issue. Not just the apparent cheap shots that everyone sees, but also the subtle things, the regular no-nalls, and the officiating pattern that appears more intended to scare and annoy than to protect. And the WNBA responded more quickly than they had on any probe in years when she ultimately made the decision to make those connections publicly on her show. The precise transcript of Sophie's remarks that led to the fine has not yet been made public by the league, but I have been sifting through the noise and keeping up with the online discussions, and the signs suggest something far more serious than ordinary referee criticism. According to several people familiar with the matter, Sophie did more than simply criticize the references. Worst of all, she questioned whether the targeting was deliberate, named certain officials, and pointed out trends across several games. You don't go beyond that line in professional sports. The referees had a rough night, if you will. Saying that they missed calls does not imply that they are intentionally doing so. Systematic bias is not implied by you. And when you have a platform that can reach hundreds of thousands of people, you most surely don't do it. However, Sophie did just that. Here's why that is so important. The receipts were with her. Alright, let's move on to the realm of rumors. Although there isn't any official confirmation, the online discussion is too loud to ignore. According to WNBA insiders, Sophie's podcast featured a detailed analysis of a particular game tape. She allegedly dissected referee positions throughout pivotal Clark moments, named the officials involved in the most contentious no-nalls, and even hinted that certain referees may have spoken with one another regarding how to manage Clark's circumstances. Sophie wasn't merely venting. Based on the tone of the internet discussion, she had a case to make. Furthermore, you are endangering the system as a whole when you provide a case against league officiating with that degree of specificity and platform reach. Consider it from the viewpoint of the WNBA. Game after game, their biggest star since Sue Bird is being thrashed. Fans are taking notice. Social media is quite popular. Each Clark match becomes into a test of the referee's skill. Then one of Clark's teammates, who has a vast network and insider knowledge, begins making connections that might result in government inquiries. What are you doing? You locate her. The message is sent by you. Before the story goes totally out of control, you attempt to keep it under control. However, in their haste to silence Sophie, the WNBA overlooked this. The fine itself turned into the narrative. It validated all of her statements. If someone were criticizing referees, why would you punish them unless their remarks were approaching painful realities? Here, too, timing is of the essence. Only a few days before a significant portion of Clark's schedule, Sophie received her fine. Games that have the potential to impact MVP voting, playoff positioning, and the course of what has turned out to be the most valuable rookie season in WNBA history. Was it a coincidence or a strategic move to lessen Sophie's advocacy's impact? This is an additional angle that no one is discussing. On the court, Sophie Cunningham is more than just Clark's enforcer. She has turned into her own voice. In press conferences, Sophie speaks what Clark is unable to say while trying to remain tactful. She takes on the conflicts that Clark is unable to resolve without endangering her own standing. Because of this relationship, Sophie is extremely important to Clark, but extremely hazardous to anyone who stands to gain from the status quo in officiating. And the answers quickly get awkward when you start questioning who gains from Clark's erratic officiating. I've been making connections between Sophie's podcast findings and some more general WNBA governance trends. To be honest, the image that comes to light is concerning. We are discussing a league that has been swiftly punishing players who criticize referees while ignoring a significant pay cap scandal for more than a year. The Las Vegas Aces case, which is currently underway and has been the subject of an inquiry for salary ceiling violations since last year. However, Sophie criticizes referees and receives a fine in a matter of weeks. What does that indicate about the priorities of the WNBA? Although official sources won't tell you this, a different picture shows up if you follow the digital breadcrumbs. In private, a number of franchise executives have questioned the league's enforcement goals. Why are they so ready to crack down on player speech yet take so long to address real problems with competitive integrity? This is where Sophie's predicament relates to that more general dysfunction. Any criticism of officiating becomes much more harmful when there are unresolved corruption charges in one aspect of league operations. It calls into question institutional integrity in ways that extend well beyond the conduct of individual referees. Sophie wasn't limited to criticizing referees. She brought attention to structural concerns at the most inconvenient moment for a league already struggling with legitimacy. Let's return to the human aspect of this, though. Being genuine, unvarnished, and the player who speaks up when others won't is the cornerstone of Sophie Cunningham's WNBA persona. Her brand isn't the only one. Fans who are sick of sterile athlete communications will find value in it. The WNBA wasn't merely punishing criticism when they discover her. She is vital to the league's environment because of her authenticity, which they were assaulting. They were asking her to be less of herself, to care less about her teammates, and to put the league's reputation ahead of her ability to compete. The thing about Sophie Cunningham is this: she isn't made to give in to that kind of pressure. According to the online temperature, this fine has only made her more determined. Her latest social media activity demonstrates that she is not retreating, but rather doubling down. She is now more willing to utilize her platform for advocacy, more outspoken about Clark's circumstances, and more critical of officiating practices. The WNBA sought to keep her quiet. They have instead produced a martyr. This is when things start to get interesting. From the standpoint of meta-storytelling, Sophie's fine has generated discussions that extend well beyond the performance of any one referee. Fans are beginning to pose more serious queries regarding the WNBA's governance, the decision-making process for disciplinary actions, and the league's priorities regarding competitive integrity. With a sanction, the WNBA was attempting to stop those discussions precisely. However, they have intensified the same conversations they wished to stifle by acting so violently against Sophie. The pattern is evident in the Reddit threads, Twitter discussions, and TikTok comments I've been sifting through. Sophie's fine is interpreted by her admirers as evidence that she was correct about everything. The league's response has completely backfired. Here's what, though, about this circumstance that worries me. What will the WNBA do to other players who voice their opinions if they are prepared to hire Sophie Cunningham to critique her podcast? Are we fostering a culture in which athletes self-censor out of fear of league reprisals? That is a risky precedent for any league that plays professional sports. Players won't be able to trust that feedback will be handled professionally rather than harshly, which fosters a culture of silence that makes the very issues you're trying to solve possible. Furthermore, such silence could have disastrous consequences in Clark's particular circumstance. Sophie is the kind of advocate she needs. She wants teammates who aren't afraid to point out targets. She needs voices that don't fear criticism from the league. All of that is at risk from the Sophie fine. According to WNBA insiders, there is rising worry that the league's handling of Sophie symbolizes a larger trend away from problem-solving and toward aggressive reputation management. According to a number of sources, league management are more concerned with managing narratives than dealing with the fundamental problems those tales reveal. When it comes to systematic officiating issues, that is the exact incorrect strategy. You are unable to overcome issues with credibility. Without addressing the fundamental problems that give rise to the criticism, it is impossible to silence it. However, rather than implementing systemic change, the present WNBA leadership appears to think that disciplinary action will suffice to handle issue. Here's another viewpoint that isn't receiving any coverage in the media. Other players are already noticing the precedent that Sophie's fine sets. Players are now more cautious when criticizing officials in public, according to several sources close to several teams. There is no such thing as a theoretical chilling effect. It's already taking place. Furthermore, rather than getting better, officiating issues worsen when players self-deny them. The WNBA has established a feedback loop in which players who are affected by officiating problems, the very persons most qualified to spot them, are now encouraged to keep silent about them. That is detrimental to more than simply competitive integrity. It harms the league's reputation in the long run. What is the ultimate goal here? What is the outcome of this Sophie situation? Because the league we currently have is more inclined to punish criticism than to deal with the issues that lead to it, some of our players are beginning to self-censor due to systemic problems. Additionally, the biggest star in the league is surrounded by teammates who are growing more and more hesitant to support her. That isn't sustainable. I've been monitoring the story's narrative temperature, and it keeps rising. Sophie's fine has turned into a focal point for larger issues with WNBA management. Supporters are relating it to ongoing officiating disputes, the unsolved Las Vegas problem, and concerns about leadership responsibility. The league wished to put a stop to the discussion. Rather, they have made it more powerful. However, this is what their computation overlooked. Sophie Cunningham's criticism of referees is not typical of any player. She is Caitlin Clark's enforcer, denouncing the league's most valuable asset being targeted in a methodical manner. You're not merely reprimanding a player when you find someone to guard your brightest star. You're also communicating your priorities, and the takeaway is that league reputation is more important than player safety. The hazard of that criticism outweighs the issues that give rise to it. That safeguarding referees takes precedence over safeguarding celebrities. When you're attempting to establish credibility in a sport that is expanding, those are the exact wrong messages to convey. The question of what follows next is unavoidable. Does Sophie escalate or does she give in? Do other players adopt her strategy, or do they turn to more tactful criticism instead? Does the league finally address the fundamental officiating problems, or does it step up its efforts to manage reputation?